Okay, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name's John Copps. I'm from Mutual Ventures, and I'll be in the chair for today's conversation. So I'll be joined by Sarah Thomas and Mark Owers, who are going to say hello in a moment. But this is the latest in a series of webinars as part of the department's fostering recruitment and retention programme. And for those joining us outside that programme, in short, that's about increasing the recruitment of foster carers and providing more loving homes for our most vulnerable children. A central focus of the programme is in creating recruitment hubs as a shared service across groups of local authorities to manage the foster carer's journey from initial inquiry to application, and a single point of contact for those inquiring to foster, and then ongoing emotional and practical advice on the approval process. To all the clusters on the programme who've joined this call, well done for getting your bids into the department a couple of weeks back, and I understand you'll be hearing imminently. So we have our fingers crossed for you. So as you start to contemplate implementation, in this webinar, we'll be asking the question, what does it mean to put foster carers at the centre of your vision and approach for the recruitment hub? And how does this affect what you do next? Your recruitment hubs provide an opportunity working together with other local authorities to do things a bit differently. And so for this to be effective, you need to be clear about what makes your hub different to a conventional local authority service, including its relationship and its approach to prospective foster carers. So if you have any questions during this discussion, please submit them using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We'll try to get to as many of them as possible. And then those we don't, we can try and answer after the session and share a copy of the recording with you to share with those who missed it. So let me now turn to our panelists, who will introduce themselves. Hello, Mark.
Thanks, John. Good morning, all. Thank you for joining this conversation. My name's Mark Owers, and I'm the chair of the National Adoption Recruitment Steering Group. I've been doing that for 5 years. I'm a former director of Children's Services in Jersey. I was the author of the 2018 review of foster care in England, and I led for about 5 years the National Regional Adoption Agency Leaders Group. And many of you will know that we regionalised the adoption system and went from 152 adoption agencies to about 32 over a 4-year period. So hopefully I bring some of that insight into what the new world in fostering will look like. Thank you.
And welcome, Sarah.
Hi, morning everybody. I'm Sarah Thomas. I'm the Chief Executive of the Fostering Network. Prior to that, I was Director for the Fostering Network Services in Wales. Prior to that, I worked for Core and Bath and part of the branch in Wales responsible for the delivery of the National Fostering Framework, which was the nationalisation of all 22 local authorities in Wales in respect to their fostering provision. And prior to that, 20 years as a social worker in the local authority sector, primarily working with fostering and children looked after.
Brilliant. Right. Well, I hope we can have a good open discussion, and contributions from the audience, as I said, are very welcome. As everybody is sort of approaching the implementation period, so there's all these questions about the vision for the service and what it looks like are very live at the moment and need to be worked out. So to sort of start us off, back to the purpose of the programme, increasing the number of foster carers that can provide loving homes for our most vulnerable children. So if that's the motivation, then let's start with a sort of fundamental question. Who should be at the centre of recruitment hubs? Should it be children or should it be foster carers? Sarah, I don't know if you want to try that first.
Yeah, I think the answer to that for me is that children should be at the centre of everything that we do in social care, because that's why we do it. That's why foster carers are here for us. That's why our services exist. That's what our legislation says. So I think when we bear in mind what it is that children need, and they are the ultimate beneficiary of the foster care system, I think it really helps us to shape our practice when we think about what it is that they need from a foster carer, what they need from their fostering service, what it is that it means for them to live in foster care. It helps us to shape everything that we do and shape the people that we help and prepare to become foster carers. So whilst I would also add that the whole thing is about being people-centred, basically, and that means also holding in mind foster carers, as they are the people that we really need to respect and bring on board to enable that system for children to work the best that it can.
Mark, what would you say?
That's really easy. I just agree with Sarah. The best interest of children should always be at the centre. Of course, they should. And I suppose part of this conversation for me, and the big question for everybody in this conversation as they think about how they make the most of this opportunity, is what stops us putting children at the centre. Because every single family support worker, every single foster carer, every single social worker, team manager, director I've ever met in my 30 years career get up in the morning because they have a vocation, and it's to help protect and to support the most vulnerable children in the world, in the country, in Wales, in the UK, to thrive. But we don't seem to be able to do that always. Why is that? And I think foster carers should be at the centre. Families should be at the centre, because if we put well-functioning families that are properly supported, that's strengths-based and based on good connections and relational working, then we enable children to thrive. And let's remember, the fostering task, fostering families are extraordinary. And it isn't about a foster carer around the child or the team around the foster carer. It's about foster families. How do we enable children to grow up in substitute family settings when they can't live safely with their own first families? And how do we make sure everything about that family works for the family and primarily for the children in the family? And foster carers selflessly devote their lives, relationships, resources, experiences, homes, to provide stability and support to some of the most traumatized children for many, many years. They need to be treated professionally. They need to feel as close to the center of the child. They need to feel that they are supported and that they are loved. And critically, for this program, they need to feel that from the very beginning, the first phone call, the first email, the first web visit, and they should feel it throughout.
So when the topic of I guess the starting point of this conversation was the question of whether or not foster carers are at the centre of the recruitment hub. So I understand where we started in terms of the vision for this whole program. The vision for fostering is about children. So where exactly are foster carers then when we're talking about this? When we're talking about recruitment? Sarah, do you have a view on that?
So I think that sometimes this is about taking it right back to the beginning and just remembering that fostering is parenting. And therefore, when you keep that in your mind, you actually start thinking about, what it is that we need to create. The environment we need to create in our recruitment practice needs to reflect that. So when I say things like that, I mean like that initial phone call, that initial home visit, that assessment, that entire process should be a trusting relationship-based process so that people can be as open and honest. I hear a lot that sometimes foster carers say it feels like a test, it feels like an interview, I feel like I have to pass the panel. And I think some of this language has led into the practice that has just become the sort of norms, that we talk about the panel as the big event that day. For me, that's absolutely nothing. All of the work happens outside of that panel. They are just reading and quality assuring what it is that's been done by the assessing social worker who's built that real relationship. So I think that's what I don't know if that quite answers the question, but I think that's what we need to bear in mind when we're thinking about who the foster carer is in this. It's about remembering the tasks we're asking them to do, and therefore putting the scaffolding around them to enable them to do that. And that means being able to say, I'm really worried that I'm not going to be able to do X, Y, and Z. I don't think I'm good enough. I don't think I've got that skill. And then being able to fill those gaps either with training and preparation and helping them, or by the support of the service. How's the service going to help fill those gaps? So, because ultimately the children that we need to place there needs to be a realistic understanding about the level of need and complexity of these children. But it's just as equally acceptable for that applicant to be terrified and to be thinking, I don't know if I can do that, So the more you can bring fostering to life, the more you can, really replicate what it is that that person's going to be undertaking, the more you can get to that point where I think everybody's on the same page and you can feel really supported.
So Mark, Sarah's talked about the experience of a foster carer in the application process, in the approval process. So we know that fostering is a real strength in the UK, actually internationally, but we know it's done better some places than other places, and we can always do better. So what is it about that experience of the prospective foster carer that you think might be missing at the moment in some services?
You make a really good point, John, that I want to just underline. And Martin there and I said this in our 2018 review. Foster care is a success story, and our care system is essentially a fostering system. 75% over the years of all children who are in care in England are in foster care. But of course, we don't have enough of the right type of foster carers for the children who need foster care. But I think we have too many children in care who are looking for foster care. If we just continue to increase foster care and residential, then we're just going to continue to increase the number of children that we're bringing into care. So there's just a general point there, John, that I want to underline. And just building on Sarah's point, for me, simply, it's about respect for the sanctity of family life, but compassionately balanced against standards and regulations. So we need to make sure that we can trust in our preparation, assessment, and approval process to let foster families get on with parenting. Whether you call them foster carers, whether you call them carers, whether you call them foster parents, and there's been all sorts of debate about that over the years, it's essentially a substitute family for me. And to be able to come to fostering at your very best, feeling your most confident, you're most excited, you need to be received in a really celebratory, open-armed, compassionate, kind way. Oh, thank you so much for getting in touch. It's amazing that you want to do something like this. And of course, it's our job to help you understand exactly what you're getting into in an open, honest, authentic, realistic way. But I'm here to hold your hand throughout this journey to make it the best possible experience it can be for you. So when the first child comes to live with you and your family, you're ready and you feel good about yourself. And in many respects, it's a very, very simple task, isn't it? How can I help you to do your very, very best and to feel confident and competent in looking after this child, this scared child, this angry child, this child that's presenting with all of the trauma that they've experienced, and to be able to manage that and contain that as a family through the ups and downs of your fostering experience with that child and all of your children. And everybody around that family has to be at their best at all times to make sure that they're doing everything in their power to help that foster family to thrive. And it's only about thriving families for me. And when all of the checks and balances get in the way and we're not able to see through that at the absolute core task, then we haven't got the processes and the system and the paperwork and the IT right. The opportunity we have here is to say our vision is to make it the best experience they've ever had in any sphere of their lives. What do we need to do that? And what do we already know that stops us doing it? And how do we overcome those obstacles within the existing regulations and standards and legislation?
Mm-hmm.
And be explicit about those obstacles and know exactly what you're going to do to control for the obstacles. Otherwise, we will always fall into the same traps.
So let's pick up some of those obstacles then, Mark. What exactly did you have in mind? And then maybe we'll ask Sarah to respond to some of those.
Well, Sarah's already named one of them. It's whether people feel good enough. So there's lots of people out there who want to foster or consider fostering or think they might be good at fostering. And that they often will have that conversation with other foster carers. We know that's one of the best routes to recruitment is word of mouth.
Mm-hmm.
But they need to feel good enough. So can I do it? Do I have the capacity and the capability? Will I trust? Can I trust in the system? As a Black male young carer from the LGBTQ plus community, will I feel welcomed? Will they look like me? Will they understand my experience? Will they value my adversity and experiences of life? Will I be welcomed with open arms? Our fostering system doesn't look enough like the people that we need to come forward to foster. And the way in which we're not always culturally competent, or we're not always, we don't always have the deep understanding we need of different communities that want to foster. Cost of living crisis at the moment. People will be worried about whether they can afford to take a child into their home. And of course, there is so much negative stories in the press that people are fearful of the system. The very fact that we have to do this program is a barrier, even though this program in itself is designed to overcome that barrier. We have a problem, and everybody knows we have a problem fostering. So why would I go to foster?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So Sarah, let's pick up some of those things. So if this is partly about, or an important thing is to make prospective foster carers feel good enough and feel welcome, how can the recruitment hub support or do that? Yeah,
I think on this note, there are two things really. It's about being really open-minded and remembering that families are made up of a wide variety of people, and the nature of their lives and how they function is diverse, and being solution focused. So some of the things that I think happen sometimes, and I've got quite a firm line on this, I've always said, and I've run many fostering teams, and I always said the only thing that precludes anybody is not having a spare room at that initial phone call, at that initial point. Really, we should be open-minded to absolutely everybody. Somebody might say they're working, and there was a tendency to say, well, then that's not possible, you can't foster. In so many cases of those people that we brought forward, they decided to give up work by the time they'd got to the end of the assessment, because they realised actually they wanted to do this as a full-time vocation. This was the way that they wanted to go. So I think we really need to be helping people to find the solutions and helping them see that they can, because if they've taken, it is an enormous step to pick up that phone. And I think we are so caught up in the busy day-to-day of things that sometimes it's easy to forget that this person at the other end, or the other end of the email inquiry or the online inquiry, has probably thought about this for a very long time. It's a huge thing that they're about to do, and they just need to hear somebody saying to them, you can do this. This is amazing. You've taken the perfect first step. We'll be out later this afternoon and we'll talk it through more. And it's the responsivity is key. Helping people to believe in themselves and being solution focused. If you start off by thinking you can't foster for all the following reasons, or these things will preclude you, or we don't need you for the following reasons, which I think is just a symptom of the pressures that are on services. I don't think anybody intended to be like this, but some services have gone down roads of, for example, if something has happened and there's been a poor outcome for children because of a particular foster carer who's working and couldn't dedicate their time, or a particular issue arose, that can then sometimes feed into the whole recruitment process, and it feeds down and it filters down through the whole service as these people in this particular circumstance can't foster. I think we need to take all that away, see this as a fresh opportunity, a fresh start, to be really solution focused when we take these inquiries from people.
So that comes back to our question in terms of what is it that recruitment hubs can do differently to local authority services, or is this, as Sarah said, this is a fresh opportunity? I mean, is there things that can be done better at scale to help to make it more welcoming, to make it more open as a process? What do you think, Sarah?
Well, I think potentially volume is
Mm-hmm.
key here, and responsivity, isn't it? So if depending on how people organize these clusters and their hubs and how they arrange their services, there's a potential for a greater focus on the recruitment activity, which, I think is what is underpinning this way forward, because we know that, on the ground in local authorities, there are many other pressures, particularly in fostering, particularly court-directed pressures from your kinship work and other aspects. So it depends on how services are structured as to whether they've been able to give that priority to recruitment. And it's very easy for it to slip down into the service priorities because of the daily pressures they're under. So I think this is an opportunity to be more responsive and to think about structuring those hubs and clusters in a way that enables that, whilst keeping that real local connection, because it is, we know that geographically, one of the things affecting the fostering sector is that often the foster carer for the child is either too far away or, not in that local authority. So, we need to make sure that we bear that in mind and keep that recruitment practice, once we get into the nuts and bolts of it, as local as possible to get the care in the right geographical area.
Yeah, and I think that's a key point that areas will be grappling with. And you're right, it's the nuts and bolts, and I don't think anyone's got an answer to that one yet. So Mark, so that question again. So what is it that you think that recruitment hubs as clusters of local authorities might be able to do better than individual local authorities, or this fresh opportunity might provide an opportunity to do things?
So similar to what we've seen in regional adoption agencies, the programme itself is an opportunity, as you say, first and foremost, to stop and to think about what you're already doing, what you're doing well and what you're not doing less well. And when you bring a cluster of authorities together, everybody can share what they're doing well and everybody can share what they're doing less well. And what you quickly realise is that some of you are doing better at some things than others, and some of you are doing less well at some things than others. And when you actually put it all together, you will see more solutions than you had on your own. You also, with scale, will see that you can use your people in different ways. And you can think about how you start delivering against some of these key words that keep cropping up. So dedicated is a really important word. Responsive is a really important word. Open and honest are really important phrases, and inclusive, I think, is another one. So what does actually that look like in terms of what you're already doing well across your cluster, across those kind of 4 words, if you like, or 5 words? And what are you doing less well across those things? So what stops you from being responsive? What stops you from being open? What stops you from being so dedicated on the fact that this person has been thinking about this for years and years, and they've finally made that phone call, and everything about your answer has to embrace what they want to talk to you about? How do you operationalize that? So every time someone answers that phone, they're ready for that amazing conversation. And it isn't interrupted by an email pinging, or it isn't interrupted by a team meeting, or a quality assurance checklist you've got to do, or a call from court, or something else. How can you give your 100% attention to that person's story and journey, and they are hanging on your every word when they're telling you it, because they are really quite conscious, self-conscious and excited and scared, and all of those emotions are wrapped up in that conversation. And it's a very important conversation.
Mm. And so is that an argument, Mark, for a dedicated service, which is what this is?
Yeah, so I have seen it work in adoption. I've also seen it work in the independent sector where I've worked, where you are able to use scale to create the conditions where you can be dedicated, where you can be responsive, where your narrow role is about serving these initial inquiries.
Mm-hmm. And can I ask a question, which I might express this in the wrong way, and I apologize if I do, but is there something about this dedicated service being able to maybe take half a step away from what local authorities are doing in terms of their statutory focus and the overwhelming kind of need to adhere to some of the guidelines that the regulations, and therefore they become slightly less incumbent by them and are able to be a bit more flexible? Or am I barking up the wrong tree there?
You're not barking up the wrong tree. And I know Sarah will want to come in on this. I mean, it's a critical part of this development and conversation. The regulations and standards are there for good reasons. They may, of course, be overly bureaucratic. They may get in the way. And they most certainly, in my view, in part need to change. But that's not what this is about. So we have what we have, and we need to make it work. But if you think about government is very good at this. So in the adoption board, for example, they used to talk about voluntary adoption agencies being better than local authorities at adopter recruitment and adoption support, because they were dedicated and single focused on just the adoption task. And we've heard over the years about how independent fostering agencies are able to focus in a different way, because they don't have the added complexities of the social work task for the child kind of wrapped up in the same organisation. But both VAAs and independent fostering agencies, like local authorities, are regulated services that have to be registered and inspected by the regulator, by Ofsted. I have no doubt in my own mind that the way in which we enact and use the regs and the standards gets in the way of relational strengths-based working. No doubt about it. But the two things have to coexist in a strengths-based way. We can't blame one because of the other. They have to coexist. So the way in which we do that, and the way in which we understand that first phone call, and whether that is a regulated activity or not, and who does or doesn't do the home visit, they're conversations that need to be had at every level in the cluster to make sure that we're getting this right in a regulatory way. But at the forefront is strengths-based relational working.
Yeah, it's really interesting, that tension. Sarah, what's your view on that in terms of, so almost back to my original question about whether recruitment hubs make it easier to be relational and strengths-based, because they might take half a step away from some of the encumbrance of the regulation.
I think it's about how we structure them. You know, whilst I would agree that the regulations could do with review, they are ultimately fundamentally they're there to safeguard children. And that is why we need to be ensuring that we adhere to them. You know, there's enough evidence that says to us that whilst anyone could come forward to become a foster carer, not everybody should. And that is the bottom line of what those regulations should be used for. I think what we sometimes have moved away from is remembering that you can still be a person, you can still practice as a social worker, and you can still be human and relationship based, whilst ensuring that those regulations are being met. And I think that's the sort of pieces of the jigsaw that we need to bring together. I'll give you an example. So one of the things that always used to be picked up in my service was around being customer focused. I used to talk about this all the time. You need to be customer focused. Ultimately, the phone call that individual makes to us is far more likely to be one of many. 20 years ago, they would only have phoned us because that would have been the only place to phone. It's now going to be one of many phone calls that they'll make. So you need to demonstrate why your service is different. What's unique, and why should I foster with you? Because you're going to offer me what? You know, what is it about you that is compelling and means you're the best place to foster? And I think that for local authorities, that should be about the fact that you are the people with the children who require foster carers. Ultimately, that is what you are here to do, and that is all about the regulations. That's meeting the regulatory requirements, but it's remembering that you can do it in a different way and being customer focused about it, and really responsive. I think there is some challenges in relation to where we say the regs start and end in respect of who does the home visit, you know, what do we deem to be the assessment process, how do we think about that application process, how can we make that more customer focused and straightforward, because I think that can be one of those significant drop-off points, because we place all the onus on the applicant to apply, when I think we can be more creative about that actually and be more involved in that process. Certainly one of the things they did in Wales was just say, you know, applications are done by us, we come to you, we complete the application, you read and sign it, and you are in that process from that point, because they realized there was an enormous drop-off of people when you were waiting for that process. So it's about using sticking within regulations, but being creative about how you meet them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
John, can I just add, and this is harder to see at this stage of your journey, but when we look to what's happened in the regional adoption world, so when we wanted to talk about customer service standards and front door practice previously in adoption, we try and get 152 adoption managers in a room, or we would divide it by 10 and we'd have some regional meetings. And then we try and co-produce different ways of thinking about how we might improve that. And it was quite difficult. What we've seen in the Regional Adoption Agency Leaders Group is we have 32 RA leaders coming together bi-monthly, where they are facilitated to seek support from one another primarily, but to problem solve, to be solution focused. And one of the things they've done around adopter recruitment is to agree service standards, which are over and above the regs and the national minimum standards, but they've agreed them as a group, and then they have been able to undertake mystery shopping in a sector-led improvement way. And they've done 3 waves of mystery shopping in terms of recruitment. Mm-hmm. So they've taken it in turns to be mystery shoppers through each of their own front doors. And they've compiled confidential reports for individual agencies, but they've taken the themes together as 32 regional adoption agencies. And they've been able to, through a very strengths-based appreciative inquiry lens, to celebrate what they're good at, but also in what is no doubt an uncomfortable way, but is in a safe way, they can actually share with each other where they're not as good as they thought they were. And they can put plans in place where they support each other, they divvy up the work, and they seek to constantly improve, which is why they've done it 3 times, because they keep going back and readjusting the baseline, and they themselves are seeing that their front door practice, their customer service is better. But critically alongside that, and I'll just make this as a minor point, John, is they are seeking feedback from the adopters regularly at a local level and at a subnational level and nationally. So as alongside the mystery shopping, they're getting feedback from those people who are receiving that service and responding to that too. So not only can you be more responsive to prospective carers, but you can also be more responsive together in improving practice. Does that make sense, John?
That is interesting, and I think this program provides an opportunity to replicate that model, I think. So as we know, there's 9 clusters at the moment who've made bids to the department, and then there's the North East Pathfinder. So you've got a community there of 10 clusters, and I think that why don't we do something similar to is done with the RAA group?
Well, the best way of thinking about whether you should or shouldn't do that is that the RAA Leaders Group has now run for 6 years. It's a voluntary group, and you nearly always get 100% attendance. And that is senior managers who are serving more directors of children's services and lead members of boards than they would like to, because they're cutting across local authorities. It's a new space that we've created in the social care system, but they go out of their way to come together for mutual support and mutual problem solving, and also to lobby mutually, to come together to say to the department, actually, we're all agreed this bit isn't quite right. We think you should change it. And the department listen to them because they are a strong, well-informed collective voice that know what they're talking about.
Yeah, well, I think so. That's a conversation we will have with hubs, because that's I guess the question is, do hubs want to be part of something like that? And it, as you say, it will work if it's voluntary, and it won't work if it's not. Can we turn to another sort of aspect of the theme we're looking at today, which is it's related to what we've already talked about, but it's the relationship between what's done at local authority level and what's done at the recruitment hub cluster level. So part of the sort of model for this program is that the recruitment hub takes in prospective foster carers, is the front door, and then works alongside the local authority approval application and approval process. Can I perhaps have thoughts on how that might work with the bearing in mind what we've talked about respect for family life and the relational and strength-based working and increasing that? Perhaps Sarah, you thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think this will need a little bit of consideration, really, to make sure that every cluster and hub does what's right for them, because I know the shape of the clusters is quite different, isn't it? The numbers of local authorities within each cluster is different. And being customer focused and responsive can be done really well in that sort of central basis, but then you need to continue that through. So you can't bring somebody in with and give them an impression of a system that is one thing and then lose that later down the journey. So I think this really does need a lot of thought in relation to how it works. I know that I talk a lot about relationships because I genuinely believe that the best way to build a trusting foster carer who's going to say yes to the children that you need them to look after from the minute that they're available to do so means that they need to trust the service, because they need to believe that you are going to really look after them, care for them, support them, and they'll be able to thrive under that relationship. So I think we have to think carefully about how we keep that throughout the journey, given this is really a new layer to it, isn't it? You know, this is another layer that local authorities haven't had before. So we're bringing this new layer on, and we need to think about how it connects with the rest of it. I think the answer is possibly to introduce, and this picks up on what Mark was just saying, and that's around quality assurance. So we need to be really clear about what the standards are, what we're expecting every service to do during that journey, to make sure that there's that level of consistency of practice, because not everything's going to be consistent. You know, we know that the level of support, the fees, the allowances, everything else, that's a minefield, isn't it? So it's about how can we make recruitment consistent. I think, again, evaluation, just picking up on what Mark said there, you know, one of the best things that the hubs could do in this early days, this starting point, would be to contact all those recently approved foster carers over the last year or so and ask them those questions. What do we do really well? And what are the things we could have done better? Because that could be your starting point for where do we put what's the quality standards we want to meet at this point, and how are we going to make sure that they filter right through? Because if somebody comes at the top of the funnel and they choose to foster with you because you impress them in every possible way and they trust you, and then that doesn't maintain all the way through the journey, we're putting a lot of effort and energy into something that could ultimately not become a productive, fruitful relationship, and they may not continue to foster, and then we've dropped off on that retention point. So that's what I would say around that. I think we need to unpick it a lot more.
Interesting. And yeah, make sure we consider the whole journey. Yeah. Mark.
So this is where I think a lot of the opportunity and threat exists. We're all in it together, and by that I mean foster carers, the hub, and fostering teams. If you think about that in its broader sense, and let's also just chuck in children's social work teams as well. So we're all in it together. And if all of the statutory kind of gubbins and processes look out to the foster carer, how confident are we that all of those teams are together when they are communicating, supporting, connecting with the foster family? So there's the kind of real challenge. So it has to be about the end-to-end journey. But of course, this isn't really about the end-to-end journey at the starting point, because we're talking about a brand new front end. And as Sarah says, a new layer if we don't get it right. So what we don't want to do is put in another thing for prospective foster carers to come in the kind of initial funnel, the initial hub, to then be passed on to something else that they were already going to be doing anyway. How is it different? And if the front end is a Rolls Royce, and at the back end you don't know whether you're going to get a Mercedes or a Mini or a old battered old Morris Minor, which I've got in the garage, 1952, if anyone ever wants to see it. But it's a classic, but it doesn't break anything like the same way as my other car. So, and what you get is, as well as the foster carer getting a variable experience in quality, you also inherently start building divides in the way in which professional colleagues see each other. So what we don't want is fostering team staff to see this elite Rolls-Royce front door and feel like they're just driving the Mini or the Morris Minor. Everybody needs to feel like they're in the same beautiful service that does its very best. Otherwise, you start creating problems in your relationships that are supposed to be allowing seamless movement across an end-to-end journey for your prospective approved and then year-on-year supported foster carers. And I think it's the biggest challenge, John, for this. How does the front bit sit with the fostering teams and children's social work teams across 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 15 authorities? And what we know from regional adoption agencies, and sorry to keep drawing on this, but the experience is rich. And this isn't about adoption, it's just about some of these similar systems, partnerships, governance arrangements, quality assurance arrangements. Please see it like that. Don't see it as an adoption thing per se. Is the board and the senior leadership across the local authorities and the way in which they are driving this, the way in which they are supporting this, the way in which they're understanding this is critical to the success. And for the project managers in this listening to this conversation, you know, if you're not careful, you get pulled one way to the other way. And you need to be really clear with the senior leaders and with the governance arrangements that they need to be united. They need to have the difficult conversations together. But they need to see this as one service, one journey, ultimately.
Yeah, no, that's really, I mean, building on Sarah's point, that's really, really interesting. So thinking, yeah, we have to think across the whole journey. We have to think about the people involved in local authorities as well. We have to think about the social work teams. Can we touch on one last point then across this issue, which is the role of existing foster carers and how that might help create this sort of relational strength-based or improve this relational strength-based journey for prospective foster carers. Sarah, what do you think? What might the hub do differently that would involve that?
I think involving lived experience is really, really critical. There's you know, the common statistic is that word of mouth is the best way to recruit. We know that if you have, and that means having a really good, well-retained fostering service. So when I talk about the journey, I talk about it all the way through. You know, it's the people in your LA that are fostering for you that will be your greatest asset in relation to recruitment. Whether they, and also I think about that in the recruitment journey. So that's why I think it's so important to give everybody the best possible standards we can, because whether they become a foster care or not, they'll talk about their experience of becoming one, and they need to think about it positively, even if it came to an end for whatever reason. So that is really critical. I don't think you can involve them too much, is what I would say. You know, you need to reach out to your foster carers now and be asking them, if you don't already use them, you know, regularly in recruitment, how could you? One of the things that I saw once, which I thought was really innovative in a service, is they did a speed dating with foster carers. So before anybody went onto the preparation training, or just after that preparation training, they would bring in a variety of their foster carers who were all very diverse and unique in relation to the type of fostering that they undertook. And the whole room would go round. They'd have 10 minutes at each foster carer to ask their questions and go round. It was really fun. It was really interesting to see. And they had really good results in relation to their recruitment and retention, because they gave a great priority right at the beginning in relation to learning and listening to other foster carers. Is this the best way to understand the realities of the role, isn't it? And there were some people who were fearful of doing that because they thought it would put people off. And I understand there's that fear, you know, that sometimes what foster carers are doing 10 years into their career is more complex and might be more challenging than what we might ask a foster carer to do in those early days, or maybe not, sometimes nowadays actually. But I think you need to be really brave and allow your foster carers in your service to lead the way with recruitment and helping and other potential applicants to understand what it means.
And Mark, have you thoughts on that involvement of foster carers?
Throughout, I'm agreeing with Sarah, which is feels comforting. The lived experience point Sarah's made very well. Telling stories, but making sure that they are diverse and they are contemporary. And by that, when I talk about diversity, I mean all of the intersectionality as it relates to kind of culture, religion, ethnicity, minoritized groups, LGBTQ+ members, young, old, male, female, in a wheelchair, able-bodied, you know, it's the whole gambit of diversity. And of course, also Sarah's made the point, it's the whole range of different types of foster care. So your remand carers, your emergency carers, your mother and baby carers, long-term. And the intersectionality of the different types of foster care and the different backgrounds, I think, are really powerful. It takes a lot of hard work to find people to come forward to be confident and competent to tell their story. And too often we rely on the same old folk, sorry, the same people. That I didn't mean age. And sometimes those people are a bit fixed and a bit jaded, and there's a bit of groupthink going on. So I would implore you to look as wide and far as you can to have diverse and contemporary stories to tell people. And one of the reasons why word of mouth is so important, because it's about storytelling, and it's about connection, it's about relationships, it's about people you trust. And the more you let them do your talking for you, the more people will come to your fostering service to foster. And if you have time, if you look at You Can Adopt, which is the campaign website for the National Adoption Recruitment Steering Group, there are podcasts and films and collateral which are entirely built from lived experience. Some of them are foster carers, actually, who went on to adopt. And we, long ago, all signed up to letting them do the talking for us, because they will always know it better than us. However much we think we hold the ticket because our name is above the door, fostering is about foster carers and foster families. We're there just to provide the safeguards and the support when they need it.
Yeah, I think that's a great note, I think, to end on. And I think we've had a really rich discussion here, and I'm going to bring us to a close at this point. So lots of things today. I mean, I think we talked about the child being at the centre of this these services, but ultimately these recruitment hubs being in a fuller sense than that, and thinking about the foster family, compassionately applying regulation, and fostering ultimately about parenting, which was what Sarah said. And I think recruitment hubs, we've agreed, provide an opportunity as a focused service, as a service where you can share ideas and bring foster carers into the equation even more. That said, there are challenges, there are lots of things to work through, and we've talked about some of those, and we'll have to work on those over the coming months, because they're significant challenges, and we recognise that. So thank you for attending, and thank you for all the for listening to us. And just to say that the next in the series of these events we're holding is around learning from the experience of the North East, where we'll hear directly from colleagues from Together for Children Sunderland, and we'll be in touch with details of that over the coming weeks. So Mark is also going to be available to clusters to help challenge you on some of the things you could do differently for prospective foster carers, and you can speak to your coaches about that. And you'll also hear more from Sarah during this process as well. We always welcome feedback and suggestions for other areas to cover, or any other events you'd like. So please do let us know, and let's keep that dialogue going. Finally, just to say thank you to both our panelists, to Sarah Thomas and to Mark Owers, and thank you to you for joining us.